In the quiet town of Doncaster, nestled in South Yorkshire, a family lived what appeared to be an ordinary life. Kevin and Glenys Gosden were proud parents of two bright children, Charlotte and Andrew. The Gosdens were known for their devotion to each other and their close-knit bonds. Andrew, born on July 10, 1993, was not just an ordinary child. He was a mathematical prodigy, a quiet, introspective boy with a mind that danced between the numbers and philosophies of Nietzsche. His brilliance was undeniable, yet as bright as Andrew's future seemed, his world would soon unravel into the shadows. It was a crisp September morning in 2007 when everything changed. Andrew, aged 14, went about his morning like any other. His parents, trusting in their son's reliability, did not question his routine. He left for school at 8:05 a.m., as he did every day, offering a casual "see you, Dad," as his final farewell. Little did Kevin know that this simple exchange would be their last conversation. But something was different that morning. Andrew wasn't heading to school. Instead, he embarked on a journey, one that would forever alter the course of his family's life. What lay behind his decision? Was it rebellion? A carefully orchestrated escape from a life of predestined academic success? Or something far darker, something inexplicable that pulled him toward the unknown? The streets of Doncaster were still waking up when Andrew, with unhurried precision, walked to the local train station. A curious detail lingered in the air. Andrew, typically meticulous, left behind critical items: a charger for his beloved PSP, warm clothes, and even the 100 pounds he had saved from his birthday. Why? It was as if he knew that these remnants of home wouldn't matter where he was going. At the station, he withdrew £100, almost emptying his bank account. Yet, he didn't purchase a return ticket. To the untrained eye, this might have seemed like a simple mistake, a teenager caught in the excitement of a day trip to London, forgetting the practicalities. But to those who knew Andrew, this was not just an oversight. It was a choice, a deliberate severing of ties to his old life. Andrew boarded a train bound for King's Cross. This is where the trail grows cold. CCTV footage from the station captured him briefly, a shadow of his former self in the bustling cityscape of London, standing alone among millions of strangers. That fleeting moment at 11:25 a.m. would be the last confirmed sighting of the boy who had, until that morning, been destined for greatness. The Gosdens, unaware of the growing nightmare, expected their son home by evening. Kevin and Glenys sat at the dinner table, waiting, calling out for Andrew. But there was no answer. When they learned from his school that he had never arrived, panic set in. Phone calls to friends yielded no clues. By 7 p.m., the police were involved, but there was little they could do in those first frantic hours. Andrew had vanished into thin air. As the hours turned into days, and days into weeks, the theories began to swirl. Was Andrew simply another teenager running away from the pressures of academia and the weight of expectation? His brilliance had marked him as exceptional, but did it come at a cost? His parents spoke of his love for Nietzsche and the unsettling concept of the Bermentia Superman free from guilt or remorse. Had Andrew, in his pursuit of intellectual freedom, chosen to break from societal norms in the most extreme way? Or was there something else lurking beneath the surface? A dark undercurrent ran through Andrew's interests: his love for heavy metal bands like Slipknot, and his fascination with the Gothic subculture. His bedroom walls were adorned with posters of bands whose lyrics danced on the edge of the abyss. Was this merely teenage rebellion, or did it hint at a deeper, more disturbing fascination with the macabre? His family, while open and understanding, began to question the unspoken parts of Andrew's life. Could he have been struggling with his identity? There were whispers, fleeting thoughts that perhaps Andrew was grappling with his sexuality, or with some internal battle he had never voiced. Yet, no evidence of bullying or depression existed, leaving those questions unanswered. Months passed, and the Gosdens traveled to London repeatedly, plastering the city with missing person posters. Despite countless reported sightings, none led to Andrew. The police, now facing a case colder than the autumn air, began to lose hope. London, a city of millions, had swallowed the boy whole. Speculation turned to darker possibilities. Some wondered if Andrew had fallen victim to an online predator, groomed by someone who offered him a way out. The absence of his PSP charger suddenly seemed more significant. Perhaps he had been coerced, convinced that the future laid out for him was a trap, and he needed to escape. But if that were true, why leave behind the very tools that could sustain him? Others believed Andrew might have been inspired by his favorite television show, The Fall and Rise of Reginald Pereng, in which the main character fakes his death to start a new life. Had Andrew, in his youthful naivety, attempted to step out of his own existence, believing it was easier to seek forgiveness than permission? The most chilling theory, though was never fully spoken aloud, that Andrew had not left on his own, that someone or something had lured him away. The CCTV footage showed him at King's Cross, but beyond that, nothing. Could he have met someone in London, someone who promised him freedom, or worse? 16 years have passed since that September morning. Andrew would now be a man in his 30s, but his face remains frozen in time, forever 14. His family still waits, still hopes. They have left his room untouched, a shrine to the boy who disappeared. And yet, the questions linger. Where did Andrew go that day? What forces, seen or unseen, led him away from the life he knew? Was it the allure of freedom, the weight of expectations, or something far more sinister that drove him into the heart of London, never to return? Perhaps the answers lie buried in the depths of Andrew's own mind, locked away with the genius that once shone so brightly, now lost in the shadows of time. In the early years after Andrew disappeared, the Gosden family seemed haunted by a vague belief that, as long as they didn't give up, Andrew would return. They believed that at any moment, the front door would open and their beloved son would walk in, as if nothing had happened. But month after month, and then long years, the door remained still, and with each passing night, the Gosden house grew even quieter. Meanwhile, another part of the story was veiled beneath the foggy streets of London. No one knew exactly why Andrew went to the city that day. London, the city with bustling streets, intricate alleys, and deep-seated mysteries. No one knew whether he stepped into the darkness of the small streets around King's Cross, or perhaps he was pulled into another world by something or someone. One of the strangest details of Andrew's disappearance is the information about a bizarre phone call that surfaced a few years later. In 2009, an anonymous man called a live radio show in London. The man's voice was tense, slightly shaky. He claimed to know exactly what had happened to Andrew and that he could reveal shocking truths. But when the host asked for more details, the man abruptly hung up. The police dismissed the call as a prank, but the Gosden family couldn't stop wondering, could that have been a clue leading to where Andrew was? Time continued to pass, but Glenys' mother never gave up hope. She began searching on her own, looking for clues the police had overlooked. She scrutinized every small detail, every CCTV clip, and even connected with private investigators who worked on other missing persons cases. Glenys received an anonymous message on a mysterious online forum, directing her to an abandoned house deep within a desolate area of London. She sensed something was off here, a cold shiver running down her spine as she stood before the old, decaying house with cracked windows and crumbling walls. She decided to take a risk and step inside, hoping to find some clue about Andrew. This house, she had heard, once belonged to a strange man who lived isolated from the world, a recluse with bizarre habits and an unusual interest in investigating missing persons cases. As she entered the house, Glenys felt a suffocating, dark atmosphere. She walked through empty, dusty rooms, with dim light filtering through the broken window slits, just enough to see the path ahead of her. After some searching, she discovered a small door, hidden deep in the corner at the end of the hallway. Almost forgotten, it led down to a dark basement. Glenys trembled, but a mother's instinct wouldn't let her leave without knowing the truth. Under the faint light from her mobile phone, she stepped down each stair, feeling as if time was stretching endlessly. Suddenly, she sensed a strange, foul smell rising from below. When she reached the bottom of the basement, what she saw made her heart stop. On the walls were bizarre charcoal drawings, strange and incomprehensible images, as if they had been drawn by a madman. The portraits depicted faces with no clear features, deep black eyes, and soulless ghosts looming on every wall. But the most horrifying thing was the old photographs lying on a dusty table in the middle of the room. Photos of Andrew. The photos showed Andrew in his school uniform, standing among a crowd at King's Cross, but one thing sent chills down her spine. In some of the other photos, Andrew was no longer alone. He was standing next to a strange man with a face half hidden in the shadows, only his sharp eyes glowing as if looking straight at Glenys through the photo. There was no information about this man, just his dark silhouette always appearing beside Andrew in photos the family had never seen before. Glenys couldn't understand what was happening. How could her son's photos have ended up here, in this cold, abandoned house? And who was that strange man? The unanswered questions began to haunt her. As she left the house, it felt as though she was walking into a never-ending nightmare. But it wasn't until she arrived home that Glenys realized the worst part. In the pocket of her coat, somehow, there was a small piece of paper and note she was sure she hadn't brought with her into the house. On it was a single line, written in red ink: "He's still here, and he will never stop." After discovering the horrifying note, Glenys had no doubt someone was watching her. The mysterious man in the photograph, whom she had never met, now seemed to be lurking somewhere, waiting and observing. A nightmare began to creep into her daily life. Glenys started to feel a strange presence in her home. At times, she caught a glimpse of a shadow darting past the window, a faint noise in the dead of night, or the unsettling sensation of someone standing right behind her whenever she turned around. She knew she couldn't give up, not only for Andrew, but also because of the increasingly palpable feeling that the answer to her son's disappearance was connected to that terrifying stranger. Glenys decided to return to the abandoned house once more, but this time, she wouldn't go alone. She hired a private investigator, a man named Harris, in hopes of uncovering the truth. Harris was a tall, sturdy man who had faced many complex cases. As Glenys recounted what had happened during her first exploration, he silently listened, but his expression gradually revealed a serious concern. "If someone is watching you," Harris said, "then we need to find him." When they returned to the abandoned house, the atmosphere felt even heavier than the first time. The sun had set, and darkness engulfed every corner. Harris led the way, his flashlight illuminating narrow pathways as they entered the house. However, this time, something felt different. A sense of unease washed over Glenys as she stepped through the door. They made their way to the basement room where Glenys had previously found the pictures of Andrew. But when Harris opened the old wooden door, the room seemed transformed. The drawings on the walls had been erased. The strange traces of a ghost were gone, and the table in the middle of the room was empty, devoid of any sign of the photographs Glenys had seen. "It can't be." Glenys gasped. "The pictures, they were here." Harris paused for a moment before turning to her. "Maybe someone tried to erase everything. We can't trust our eyes. This could be a psychological game." Just as they were about to leave, an unexpected noise echoed from above. They both jumped, and Harris quickly swept the flashlight across the dark corners. He signaled for Glenys to stay still while he drew a gun hidden in his coat and ascended the stairs. Glenys watched anxiously, each of Harris's footsteps seeming to reverberate throughout the house. But only a few minutes later, Harris returned, his face colder than ever. "We need to leave immediately," he said, his voice tense. Before Glenys could ask for more details, Harris hurriedly pushed her outside, and they fled from the abandoned house. On the way back, Harris's silence left Glenys deeply unsettled. Only when they reached home did he finally reveal the terrifying events that had transpired. "When I went upstairs," Harris began, "there was something waiting for us. In the middle of the floor, there was a chair, and on it sat an old doll. But what was chilling was that the name Andrew was carved into the doll's forehead. Since that day, Harris dedicated more time to investigating the abandoned house and the history of the strange man who had lived there. Clues began to emerge, but the deeper he delved into the case, the more he felt that something dreadful was happening. Unsolved disappearances and the faint traces of a shadowy network that hunted young people. Harris started to realize that Andrew was not the only case. Over the past few decades, many young people had mysteriously vanished, and they all shared a common thread. They had appeared in London around the time of their disappearances and seemed to be watched by an anonymous figure. As he researched the abandoned house, Harris discovered that the man who had lived there had committed suicide several years prior, leaving behind strange letters mentioning a dark force he was trying to escape. The letters revealed that he had been involved with a secret organization investigating supernatural phenomena and unusual disappearances. But what he had uncovered about Andrew seemed to have driven him to madness. Glenys and Harris realized they were not just facing an ordinary disappearance. Andrew might have become the target of a force that no one could fully understand. But they also recognized another possibility. Andrew might still be alive, but held in a place far removed from the real world, where darkness and mystery enveloped everything. One late night, while Glenys was sitting in her living room, the dim light from the lamp casting shadows around her, she received a strange call. On the other end was a familiar voice, yet weak and filled with panic. "Mom, it's me, Andrew. I can't stay here long. He's coming. He knows you're looking for me. Don't go near that house anymore. He won't forgive." The call ended before Glenys could respond, leaving her in a state of utter terror. Andrew's call was like a flicker of light in the vast darkness, but it was also the most terrifying warning Glenys had ever received. She couldn't stop thinking about her son's final words. "He knows you're looking for me. He won't forgive." Who was he, and why had Andrew warned her not to approach the abandoned house? The more Glenys thought about it, the stronger her resolve became. She had to find a way to save her son, even if it meant confronting this terrifying entity. Together with Harris, she decided to return to the abandoned house one last time. That night, Harris drove Glenys back to where it all began, the abandoned house. Along the way, the air inside the car was thick with tension. Harris said very little, his eyes always fixed on the road ahead. Both understood that this could be their last chance to uncover the truth. When they arrived, the surroundings of the house were eerily still. Darkness enveloped everything, with only the car's dim headlights illuminating the overgrown dirt path. Harris turned off the engine, and they sat in silence for a moment before deciding to enter. Glenys felt each step grow heavier, as if the house itself was swallowing them into another world, a world of spirits and shadows. As they entered the house, an indescribable eerie feeling filled the air. The atmosphere seemed thicker, heavier, oppressive. Harris cautiously led Glenys to the basement, where they had previously found clues about Andrew. But this time, the room felt entirely different. In the center stood a large mirror, emitting a faint glow despite the lack of light. Glenys felt her breath hitch as she gazed into the mirror. In the reflection, it wasn't just the two of them, there was a faint shadow standing behind them. Glenys quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. "It's in the mirror," Harris said, his voice trembling. "Something is watching us." Just then, a soft laugh echoed from afar. Glenys and Harris stood frozen, hearts pounding in their chests. The laugh grew louder, as though it was approaching. And then, a raspy voice emerged from behind the mirror. "You shouldn't have come here. Andrew belongs to me now, and soon, so will you." Harris yanked Glenys out of the room, but the mirror suddenly emitted a blinding light, and from it, a tall, dark figure with no discernible face emerged. It had no features, but its eyes glowing red like the fires of hell stared directly at them. Harris drew his gun, but the entity only laughed, a chilling sound like the wind howling through a desolate field. "Nothing can save you," it said. "Andrew is already a part of this darkness. You will never see him again." Despite her terror, Glenys realized this was her last chance to save her son. She turned to face the shadow, shouting, "I want to see my son. Let me speak to Andrew." The figure paused for a moment, then pointed at the mirror. In it, Andrew's image slowly appeared. But it wasn't the boy Glenys remembered. Andrew was now gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his face covered in scars. "Mom," Andrew's voice was weak. "I tried to run, but I couldn't." Glenys choked back tears. "My boy, I will save you. I promise." But the shadow only scoffed. "You think you can defeat me? I am the darkness. I am humanity's greatest fear. There is no escape." At that moment, Harris decided to risk it all. He lunged at the mirror, smashing it with all of his strength. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room. But instead of being destroyed, the shadow only grew stronger. It roared in fury, and the house began to shake. "Run!" Harris shouted, but Glenys stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She knew that if she ran now, Andrew would be trapped forever in this dark world. She decided she would stay and face her greatest fear. She charged at the shadow, screaming her son's name, while Harris desperately tried to pull her back. But it was too late. The darkness engulfed Glenys, vanishing into the void. Days later, the police found Harris unconscious outside the abandoned house. He was taken to the hospital, but when he awoke, Harris couldn't speak of what had happened. The abandoned house had burned down, leaving no trace of Glenys or Andrew. Both seemed to have disappeared without a trace, just like so many others before them. The story of Andrew Gosden and his brave mother became one of the most chilling and mysterious disappearances in history, with no explanation ever found. But those who lived near the abandoned house swore that on nights of a full moon, they could still hear the faint cries of a boy. And sometimes they glimpsed the shadow of a mother, forever lost in the darkness, searching for her son who was lost to her forever.